How's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of using braid versus monofilament. Now, braid is going to give you sort of a tougher, tougher line, in my opinion. It's going to be a lot harder to snap because braid is basically tightly wound, like cloth-like substance, like string almost, and you don't really have a whole lot of snaps with braid, depending on what pound test you're using. Now, I actually have two poles here for reference. We'll get to those a little bit later, but let me give you the the main things you're going to want to know to determine whether or not you want to use monofilament versus braid. Now, a lot of people who fish out of boats, they like using monofilament. And the reason why they like using monofilament is because the line doesn't float on top of the water, right? And because of that, you're not going to have as much floating. It sinks really well, and it's a pretty strong line depending on what test you use. I like mono for using bobbers, like stick floats and stuff like that. If you're going out there and using a stick float, there's a lot of information out there about how to make your own floats. But personally, I don't use mono because I think it comes off tougher off the spool. I don't think it's as smooth of a cast. As well as the fact that I think braid is tougher. And a lot of guys who fish lakes, they prefer braid as opposed to guys who fish in boats who like using mono. So that's something to consider what you're fishing out of, what sort of environment you're fishing out of. We've got mono on this rod, and you can kind of see how it goes onto the spool there. It doesn't look very smooth on the spool. It's very much like plastic. I mean, you can hear what kind of touch it has on the pole. And all I'm really using on that is a basic leader. I'm using a leader here. It's a barrel swivel. This is a high quality barrel swivel that has a ball bearing. And I do this on all my lines. I use a clinch knot. I take a clinch knot and I tie that to each end. And clinch knots serve me pretty well. A problem you're going to have with mono is it is a lot harder to tie, especially if you're using the high-end mono. If you're using a 80-pound test mono from, say, like Whisker Seeker, like this leader line I got here, it's going to be a lot harder to tie down, and it may not hold as well. So that's something else about braid you gotta remember, is that with braid, it's gonna tie on there tight and it's gonna stick there. And I can kind of give you a little image of that as well. Let's see here. Where is my barrel swivel? Here we go. So here you have the barrel swivel. I still use the monofilament for leader line because when you're using a leader, you're going to want to use heavier line than your main line. And this is my leader here. My right up here is my leader. It goes up to my hook, and I don't attach anything up there, not even a swivel, on up to the hook. We just tie a nice snell knot onto the hook, and this holds tight. And there are a lot of videos, like Catfish Dave has some good videos on how to tie your snell properly. I did not use that for reference. I tie my own snells. It's very hard with this heavy monofilament, which you can see there's a little bit of abrasion from where I was fishing the other night, from fish getting a hold of it. But this is really tough line here. This 80-pound test leader line from Whisker Seeker, I highly suggest it. Despite the fact that it's hard to tie, it's also not going to pop. This line is not going to pop on you. It's not going to snap. The biggest problem you're going to have is your hook coming off if it's not tied tight enough. So you're going to have to tie this on real tight, the snell knot. And you're going to have to tie your clinch on real tight. I mean, I use a really the more times that you loop over your clinch, the stronger that knot is going to be. And I actually I let there be a lot of extra line off of this, so that it has a lot of room to pull when I'm pulling in fish, because I really don't want that to pop. That's the biggest problem you're going to have with mono, is not tying. Mono is a lot easier to get out of a bait caster when you have a backlash, because this braid is going to be really hard to get out of the spool. You have to pick at it, you have to get in there. I mean, you can see how tightly it is wrapped onto the spool, which is actually, I believe, a good thing. And with these Abu Garcias, I mean, it is a smooth cast. It's the best reel I've ever owned. But you can see how tight it is on there. I can't move that braid on there. It fills into the gaps. Whereas if I played around with this braid, I mean, not this mono, I can kind of move it around. You see, I can kind of move that around. It's not as tight on the spool. It's like a polymer almost. It's like a plastic. I have 50-pound test Berkeley big game mono on this, which means that it can handle 100-pound fish if I have the drag set correctly. And then 80-pound test leader line that's abrasion resistant. With mono, this line's going to sink. It's going to sink to the bottom. You're not going to have a problem. And the problem with line not sinking is that your bobber is going to get picked up by the wind, and it's going to get carried on down to the end of the lake. It's going to go with the current. And, I mean, if you don't mind adjusting your lines, 10, 20 times throughout the night, on just one pole, that's all fine and good. But personally, I fish around a bunch of people, and when that changes, I might change my mind. But for what the specifications I'm performing right now, I prefer braid, because mono is not going to float on you. It's going to sink, which makes it really nice for out at the lake. The problem with that is you're going to have a harder time launching it out farther, depending on how much weight you're using. And if you're using a float, you're not going to want to use much weight, because you don't want that float to sink on you. You want a lot of float to be sitting on top of the water. Now, floats are only really necessary for one thing, and it's not exactly what you think, in my opinion. A lot of people use floats so that they can see if their bobber goes under, and that's great and all. But when you're using a clicker, when you have a reel like this Abu Garcia, you don't really need any sort of visual, because you can hear that clicker running. I'll give you sort of an idea of what that sounds like. Go ahead and press in your spool right here. See? And then clicker here is on the other side. You turn the clicker on. See? It's now engaged, disengaged, engaged. And when this line comes out, you can hear it run. So you don't necessarily need the visual if you're using a rod that has a clicker on it. I honestly don't use it for visual at all, and a lot of guys give me crap. They say, you ought to use nightsticks so you can see when your bobber goes under. It's like, well, if they're just taking my bobber under, they're probably not actually going to take the bait until the line starts running anyways. So why do I need to see the bobber? I just fish in the pure darkness. I mean, light is nice so that you can see if your rod's bouncing. If you have a rod that doesn't have a clicker on it, you got to close the bail. But if you just open up the bail and turn on that clicker, you're going to hear it anyways. But as far as this braid goes, it sinks well. And some guys think that it's tougher than braid. It's a good argument. I haven't done experiments. I'd like to do that on this channel in the future. But personally, I have a harder time breaking my braid. Of course, I'm using 80-pound braid, though. I have used 40-pound braid, and I haven't had 40-pound braid snap on me. So I think that even my 40-pound braid that I used to have on my old Penn Squall actually didn't pop as much as this 50-pound mono. I think that it's tougher, more tightly wound. It's good line. Now your braid's going to fray more. Braid is going to You're going to get frays in the line depending on how much you have a fish. Well, how much use you have, really. You're going to get nicks. You're going to get like dents in the line, you know, and you're going to get frays. And every time you go out fishing, you should inspect your line to ensure that you don't have any nicks. Because if you get a hold of a big fish, you don't want to have any sort of knots, any sort of dents, any sort of cuts in your line, because you're going to lose that fish. Any problem that you have, whether it be not having your knot tied properly on your hook, or you're not properly tied on your leader line, you're going to lose a big fish. So you really want to make sure that everything is done properly. I can get into spinners as opposed to bait casters in another video, but personally I'm of the mind that bait casters are probably the best catfishing reel. Braid, I mean, it winds tightly to your spool. It's going to be harder to pull a bird's nest out, so you have to be more proficient with how you throw out your bait. You have to keep your thumb on the spool while you're casting. Just don't press it on the spool. Just place your thumb over it so that it has a break, so that it's not coming out so quickly that it's creating knots in the spool from there being free line. Like when this comes out, it's going to come out quick, you know, depending on how you set your drag. Well, not your drag, how you set your tensioner on your spool. Now, there are two tensioners on this Abu Garcia. There's one on this side, which is the main tensioner, and then there's a specificity tensioner over here, which is going to let you fine-tune your reel to get the exact tension you want on your spool. That's why I like bait casters. You have a lot of options. It's not going to just be free spool as soon as you cast it, same thing every time, like this spinner. Now you do have, well, it's not exactly a tensioner, but this is where you set your drag here up top with a good old spinner, typically. This is, I believe it's a Okuma Avenger, ABF 8000. It's a nice reel. I've caught a lot of fish off of it. I've caught some big fish off of it. But personally, I prefer the bait caster. As far as that monofilament goes, you know, it's not going to be as tight on your spool. If you're using a spinner, when you cast it, it's going to snap at your hands. It's going to hurt. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be easier to get a bird's nest out of a bait caster like this if you're using monofilament in it. So if you're inexperienced with using a bait caster, monofilament is probably going to be something better to start out with. Or, you know, maybe if you just want to dive in the pool, you know, and get used to it, you know, to start with braid. A lot of people, they got problems with braid not sinking, and I actually have a solution. I could teach you something my local redneck taught me. A fellow named Vincent, shout out to Vincent, who has been fishing since he was 10 years old. He taught me a little something about braid. And there are two methods to actually doing this, but if you want all the benefits of using braid, but also want to have, well, if you want all the benefits of using braid and all the benefits of using mono, there's one easy way to do it. And here's how you're going to do it. You're going to take a bowl like this, and you're going to go out and buy whatever braid you're going to use, and you're going to soak it in that water. And most likely, it's going to come to the surface of that water. So you're going to have to put a rock or something on top of it, some type of weight. And you're actually going to soak it in this water for 3 full days, outdoors. Leave it outside for 3 full days in the water, submerged. Put it someplace where nothing's going to disturb it. You know, put it someplace where the wind isn't going to get to it, you know, in front of something. And after those 3 days, spool it onto your reel wet, and your braid will actually sink. Now, there's actually another method of doing this I've been taught. You can actually boil your line as well. As far as the specifics go on that, I'm not exactly sure. But if you don't want your line floating in the wind and you want a tougher line that's going to go tighter onto your spool, here's what you're going to do. You're just going to go soak your line in water for 3 full days, full calendar days, and then you're going to spool it onto your bait caster wet. And it will have more absorbency. It will sink under the water. This is your redneck tip for the day. Personally, in this conversation, I'm taking braid all day. I mean, this is tough line. This is 80-pound test. this is what I was catching a lot of fish on a couple of days ago. It's a great line. I don't think I'll be using any other line for the foreseeable future, unless there are some major developments that I haven't heard about. If you have heard anything, and you want to let me know, go ahead and say so down in the comments. But yeah, that's going to give you the general idea. If you're fishing out of a boat, I suggest monofilament. You could drop it straight down. Use very heavy monofilament. Use 80-pound test. And you may not even need a leader. I'd still suggest a leader. It just kind of separates your weight and all that sort of stuff from other things. And I can get into what the perks of having different weights are. But as for the conversation on mono versus braid, my opinion. Feel free to tell me your opinion in the comments. And this is the Flathead Catfisherman signing out. Thank you. Have a good day.